New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring. What if you had a place to return to every day for peace, clarity, and connection? The New Thought Ministry of Prayer offers live morning and evening prayer, along with a growing library you can access anytime. This is a space for reflection, renewal, and real spiritual practice, rooted in the understanding that something greater is already alive within you. You are welcome here. Join us live or watch anytime. The New Thought Ministry of Prayer, part of the New Thought Media Network. Come, take a moment for what matters most.
Hey everybody, Tracy Brown here. Welcome to the Inclusive Church right here on the New Thought Media Network every Tuesday at noon Mountain Time. The Inclusive Church, if just in case this is your very first time hanging out with us, we come together to recommit and to talk about what it means to truly build and maintain a spiritual community where oneness does not require sameness. And what does it really mean to be inclusive? And how, as a leader, can each one of us show up consistent with that intention? So we've just finished a series where we did spiritual practice together. So we've done a few weeks of diving into just the inner work, right? The inside work and grounding that really confirms or affirms the commitment that we each have made. And so today we're going to move back into, all right, so I've got that inner commitment recentered, regrounded, and now what are some of the things that I can do? And one of the things that has come up, interestingly to me, very interesting, that in the last couple of months, one of the things that has come up a number of times is pushback on affinity groups of people within a spiritual community or within a church that gather based on some common element, whether that be race or gender identity or age or sexual orientation, language spoken, all kinds of different categories that we all have within us, because none of us are just one thing, right? Yes, I'm Black, but I'm also a lot of other, I also fit into a lot of other categories and identity groups, right? So, couple of examples that involved me directly that caught me a little off guard. I was participating in a conference, and the Black attendees, the people of African descent who were attending the conference, got together for 1 hour in a multi-day conference to network and to get to know each other, exchange contact information, and just kind of affirm each other, validate each other. And it was not in competition to any scheduled part of the conference. And there were a number of people who, before and during the conference, who questioned why the Black participants actually were meeting. And there were a few people who asked if they could participate. And there were a few people who just showed up and said, well, I'm at this conference and I'm curious, or I want to be here. I want to be with you all. And it was just really interesting. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because, of course, if you know anything about me, you know that I will ask people, not in an angry way. I'm really just curious. Why do you do not fit in the identity group that has been defined? Why is it that you want to attend? Or why is it that you are upset that this group is gathering and you're not a part of it? Or why do you think they should not be meeting? So I'll tell you about the answers to the questions, but I'm going to share a couple of other examples. Another really recent example was with an online, not an in-person, but an online group. And the conversation was the participants came from many different identity groups. But for the conversation that was going to happen in breakout rooms, people were asked to identify by 3 different labels, 3 different identity groups, so that they could be paired with in the breakout rooms with people who shared that same identity group. And the meeting went okay, but there was, after the breakout groups, there was conversation about 15 or 20 minutes that wasn't on the topic for the day, but switched to the topic of, well, why did you break us out into these different identity groups? I don't want to be separated from everyone else. So I could give you 4 or 5 more examples just from the last few months, but those are 2 that come to mind because in both cases, they were people who are practicing new thought. Sometimes I expect to have more pushback when I am in a corporate setting, but I'm finding that there's as much or more pushback in our spiritually grounded, or what we think of, or what we expect to be spiritually grounded communities. And that's why I wanted it to be the topic for today. So let's talk about what affinity groups are and what they are not. Maybe let's set the groundwork there. So affinity groups are when you put people together who have an affinity for something, or they are part of the same identity group. And the one that seems to come up the most in the US is, when people are separated, right, or put into different identity groups or different breakout groups based on race or ethnicity. So that happens relatively, that's relatively common, or they may not be, quote unquote, separated. I'm thinking like breakout groups when you're in an active meeting or conversation. But in different churches and spiritual communities, they may have a group for the members and participants or congregants who are Spanish speakers, or they may have an affinity group, a women's circle or a men's circle. They may have an affinity group for people under the age of 30, young adults. All of those are affinity groups. You may have an affinity group for your LGBTQ plus members and guests, or I've been in some communities that have groups for lesbian women and for gay men and for people who identify as non-binary. Why would you do that? Is what people ask me a surprising amount of time. We are all about oneness. Why are you separating people out? I want to be with everyone. Everyone is the same. And if you know me, you know that last phrase, everyone is the same, just makes me cringe, because that is not what oneness is about. Calm down, Tracy. Right? So it's no surprise that the subtitle of my Stained Glass Spirit book is Creating or Building Spiritual Communities Where Oneness Does Not Require Sameness. What we teach in New Thought is that everyone is an individualized expression of the one source, the creator. Each one is individualized by the nature of that language. Every person is supposed to be different. So diversity is a representation of divinity, the creativity of divinity, the infinite nature of divinity. We're not supposed to be alike. Because we come from the same source, we are supposed to be able to honor the connection that we have with one another and seek what we know is the God or the seed of the creator in every person, no matter what they look like, how they express, what they represent, etc., etc. So when we know in our church or in our community that we have many different types of people, then we understand that different groups of people may have some different needs or experiences. And everyone doesn't experience our church, our philosophy, or our activities in the exact same way. So the purpose of affinity groups is to provide an environment where there is validation of an experience that a group of people might be having, that there is emotional support where there is a cultural overlay. an affinity group will often resources that won't apply to the majority of people or for many people in your church, but will apply to this particular group that has certain interests or certain needs. And so it's really important that occurs. I'm smiling because a couple years ago, I was talking with someone who was leading a group in their church, and it was in the western part of the United States, and um, they served, but they wanted to expand their service to the community of Native Americans, American Indians, people in their geographic area that they had been reaching out to for a while, and they wanted to grow that. And I just casually mentioned a version of the New Testament that I had fallen in love with, and it was the New Testament from a Native American perspective, from the values, the beliefs, the cultures of different of the common values that went across a number of tribal communities and tribal traditions. And they had never heard of the book. They had never heard of this translation. And they purchased it. And then they had not really a book study, but they used that version of the New Testament and built a bridge to. It was really fascinating. It was really like three paths coming together, right? So they were building a bridge between biblical writing and framework and metaphysical Bible interpretation using this Native American translation, which was so metaphysical, but it was telling the stories of the Bible. It was fascinating. In fact, as I'm saying it out loud, I'm thinking, oh, maybe I want to do that just in general, because it's just an interesting thing to do. But I talked with them, 6 months later, and they had created this conversation. And for, I think it was 8 weeks, they used that book as a bridge and built an entirely new relationship. And then that book continued to be a resource that the Native American congregants used over and over again. And the minister also made a habit of quoting from it, on a regular basis so that more people could be exposed to it. So your affinity groups often will provide resources that link or combine a specific group of people who you are serving, and gives something that is really meaningful to that group, rather than assuming that one size fits all, right? One document, one example, one book fits all. And then one additional thing that comes to mind about, what are affinity groups and why do you have them? Sometimes it's really helpful to have a culturally appropriate translation or culturally appropriate presentation, because we're always building bridges, right, between what we teach in science of mind or unity or general metaphysics. We're trying to build a bridge so that people can apply it in their own lives. So if that's what affinity groups are, what are they not? And this is where a lot of the myths, misconceptions, and misperceptions arise. So affinity groups are not just to create cliques, like, oh, everybody who has shares some aspect of their being, now they're just a clique and they're not going to engage with anyone else. That's not the purpose of affinity groups. The affinity groups are not about, hey, that group needs to go meet and fight for their rights inside the church or outside the church. Occasionally, there will be affinity groups that are about advocacy, faith-based advocacy, and in their charter or in their mission, it may be that they are talking about how do we advocate for the values we teach to be integrated into our local community, our national community, or our global community. But that would only be the case if it is the stated purpose of the group to be advocates from that kind of perspective. But in general, affinity groups are not about fighting for anything. They are about nourishing and supporting and expanding um, whatever your mission is with people who fit that particular affinity group. Another thing affinity groups are not, when affinity groups are meeting, they are not spending their time planning a hostile takeover of your church. They're a part of your church. They are actively engaged in your church. They are making sure that they are understanding and contributing, but they are not planning a hostile takeover. And it's funny, I'm laughing because there are a couple of groups that I'll use my home spiritual community as the example. For decades, um, in our annual programming, there would be a programming for a practitioner Sunday where practitioners would provide the talk and often the music and be in service in a very visible way, would design and deliver the Sunday service. We had a youth and family Sunday at least once a year where our young people would, that it would be an intergenerational service. We had a teen Sunday where the teens, especially the older teens, would design and deliver the Sunday service. But we never ever would phrase it as a takeover, like they're taking over the church, right? But I'm smiling because in the last year, I've seen that used several times, like the young adult takeover, the next gen takeover, because you haven't noticed us, and so we're going to take over and force you to pay attention to us. It has a tone and a language that I personally don't think is supportive of being inclusive. It's more competitive, and it can work. And I just think about it if you're going to use that, because if it supports people who are unclear about the value of affinity groups, if it supports them thinking about, oh, I have to sit back because I'm not a member of that group and they're going to take over, then you don't want to have that environment. If you have in your church or your community an environment where that's not going to be the reaction, or you're pretty confident, then sure, use takeover. But just know that if someone comes up to you and says, um, why are our Spanish speaking circle over there meeting? Are they getting ready to like come and take over? This really has come up a lot with the LGBTQ plus community, that in several New Thought churches where people who did not identify as LGBTQ plus, any of those communities, felt like, oh, are they over there planning? Like, maybe I shouldn't be here. Is this becoming a gay church? Maybe I should go to another church around the corner, down the street, in the next county. And so you're not trying, there are usually people who are in affinity groups are not even thinking about, like, we're trying to, run other people away. They're trying to find some sense of safety and recognition and value in their own community. And the last thing that people often say when I ask them, well, what do you think they're doing, or why are you uncomfortable? They'll say, well, they're meeting and they're probably talking about all the things that people in my group do wrong. If my group especially is the group that is the majority in the church, by race, by gender, by age, whatever. And so some of that might be human tendency, but we're talking about groups in churches. So affinity groups really do serve an important purpose. And the Maya Angelou quote that one of the ones that I really love, it's this one. While I know myself as a creation of God, I am also obligated to realize and remember that everyone else and everything else are also God's creation. So this discomfort with people who share something in common, gathering together to support one another, to expand our teaching, to understand it better. Wow. If we could remember the Maya Angelou quote, we would be like, yes, everyone is different. And I know it's helpful for me when I find people that I share something in common with. And so I'm glad that they're finding someone within our community, that they don't have to go outside our community to say, yes, everyone in the community, we share a common affinity for these New Thought teachings. And it's a yes and, not an either or. And how cool is it that our community has so much diversity that it's large enough for a group of people who share something in common to be able to talk and see each other and support each other. So I don't know how this sits with you, but if you have a comment, yes, please say hi, good afternoon, or add a comment. Marjorie says, this brings back to mind the old Jim Crow era of separate but equal language that was hard fought to finally overcome. But now, sadly, there are renewed fears about potential harm from gaslighting. So if we know anything about history, or if, like some of us who have lived the history, we know that separate but equal was language that was used, but the way it was rolled out was anything but equal. So in our spiritual communities, we have an opportunity to understand that gathering with like people by choice is something that can be used to enhance what we teach and to model what we teach, not to force people to be in groups and then give those groups a hierarchy of values. Like it's better to be in this group, or oh, you're creating a problem by identifying in that way. You get to identify in the way that works for you and that represents who you are as you are learning and practicing the principles that we teach. Another part of the conversation that I have found myself having with a number of people that I think is helpful to mention is if someone is having a problem, they really are not understanding why this could be helpful to have the members who are of a certain ethnicity gathering together, or members who are in a certain age group. I mean, we have teens, right? And we have our young children in a different classroom than we have our teens in. We have our young adults, right? We have often many communities will have gatherings or groups of people who identify in the label of senior citizens or older. In my community, we call the wisdom group, but I've heard other communities label that group of the sages, the spiritual sages. The name doesn't really matter, but it's funny to me that we don't have any concern about having age appropriate conversations. So if you're teaching a basic spiritual principle of any kind, and you're teaching it to the kiddos who are 5, 6, 7 years old on Sunday morning, you're not going to use the same examples that you would use with your 18-year-olds or your 28-year-olds or your 38-year-olds who want help understanding it, but also being able to explain it to their children. Or you wouldn't talk about it the same way with someone who is 68. So we say age appropriate, we're used to that in our everyday world. So if it's about safety, if I'm having a conversation about safety, I'm going to choose different examples for the 8-year-old, then the 18-year-old, then the 38-year-old, then the 68-year-old, because they're different experiences in the world. Somehow, we don't think about, some people don't think about, it's really the same thing, that we need to have culturally appropriate conversations with people who experience life from different cultural lenses. And that's not just race and ethnicity. It is sexual orientation. It is disabilities or physical limitations. Like culturally, there are things that people do and say. And if we want our teaching to really be relevant, and we develop the skill to be able to connect, and or we create affinity groups so people who share a cultural experience can find and develop the examples that make sense in the way that they experience the world. So it's really not any different from that which we already do in one context, but we could bring it over to a different context. So affinity groups are not about hostility within the organization. It's not about one group fighting with or fighting for more attention than another group. It can be, affinity groups can be a really helpful tool. And affinity groups are not only limited to, again, race. They're not only limited to age. They could be related to sexual orientation, gender identity, or simply the experience of how you engage with your church. So could you have an affinity group of people who have joined your community, your church, especially since 2020, and engage with your church only or primarily, like 95% of the time, online, and they never come in person? Absolutely. That would be an appropriate affinity group. They would not be trying to change everything to online only, but it would give people who engage with your church online, one, a network of people, but also input into how to engage and what are some things that really work or that could work to make the experience even more powerful. So don't throw affinity groups out. I think that's kind of my bottom line. Explore how you could be using affinity groups to be more inclusive, to affirm and validate your commitment to being inclusive. Ernest Holmes said, no, not Ernest Holmes. Alan Alda said, begin challenging your own assumptions. Your assumptions are your windows on the world. Scrub them off every once in a while, or the light won't come in. So if you have had negative assumptions about affinity groups, I would invite you to just think about that and challenge those assumptions and look for the good that might be possible with affinity groups, excuse me, in your community and how you might use them in your church in order to engage people more deeply, more authentically, and in a way that means something to them and to the growth of your community. That's about it for today's Inclusive Church, talking about affinity groups. This is the month of June, so there are so many things that you might be planning that serve the diversity that is in your congregation. Of course, it is Pride Month in most large cities in the US. It's also Black Music Month. There is a summer solstice coming up this month, and a half dozen other things, including Juneteenth on June 19th. So find something that you can focus on or you can have conversation about in your church that represents diversity in our society and diversity in your congregation. And let it be known, make it clear that you're one of the people who is a leader, not afraid of the diversity that is existing around you. And of course, I want you to come back next Tuesday at noon Central Time and join me right here on the New Thought Media Network for the Inclusive Church.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.
There is a presence ready to meet you here. Join the New Thought Ministry of Prayer live every day, 8:15 a.m. and 8:15 p.m. Mountain Time. Enter a field of intention where prayer is spoken and something deeper is revealed. Our professional prayer partners stand with you in truth, in love, in possibility. Bring your request live or share it anytime at ntmedia.org/prayer. Come as you are and step into what is already becoming. We look forward to praying with you.